I'm Julia, 29, female. I live in a quiet apartment downtown, a minimalist space that feels like a sanctuary from a world that often stares too much. As a dietitian, I spend my days helping people heal their relationship with food, a calm and controlled profession that stands in stark contrast to the chaos that shaped me. The faint, silvery scars that run up my left arm and across my shoulder are a permanent reminder of that chaos, of the fire that nearly took my life when I was just 9 years old. For 20 years, I believed it was a tragic accident, but a letter from my dead grandfather was about to prove that the truth was far more monstrous. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The scent of smoke is a ghost. It doesn't visit often, but when it does, a distant bonfire, a neighbor's barbecue, a blown-out candle, it throws me back 2 decades in an instant. I'm 9 years old again, trapped in my bedroom, the heat blistering the paint on my door and the air turning to poison. The memory is a collage of screams, shattering glass, and the terrifying orange glow that consumed everything I owned. I survived, but not without a price. The doctors performed grafts, and the physical wounds eventually healed into the network of scars I now hide under long sleeves. The emotional scars, however, were deeper. They were tended to by my mother, Susan, who transformed into the very image of maternal devotion overnight. She was my rock, my fierce protector, the woman who held my hand through every painful procedure and whispered assurances that I was still beautiful. My father had died in a car crash 2 years before the fire, leaving just me and my mother. After the incident, we were inseparable. She homeschooled me for 2 years, shielding me from the cruel questions of other children. She managed the insurance payout, rebuilding our lives in a new, pristine house where everything was fireproofed and monitored. To the outside world, Susan was a saint. She chaired fundraisers, organized community events, and was universally admired for her resilience and grace in the face of tragedy. She built her entire identity around being the mother of a survivor. My survival became her story, her badge of honor. Even as an adult, she maintained a level of control that often felt suffocating. She'd call multiple times a day to check on me, question my friendships, and offer unsolicited advice on my career and personal life. My longtime friend, Mark, often joked that I had a helicopter mom with a jet engine. I always defended her, attributing her overbearing nature to the trauma she endured. She almost lost me, Mark, I'd say. Of course, she's protective. I believed it. I believed in her unwavering love because it was the foundation of my entire world. The fire had taken my childhood home, my sense of safety, and my unblemished skin. The one thing it gave me was a mother whose love seemed boundless. It was a comforting lie, and like all the best lies, it was wrapped in just enough truth to feel real. But foundations built on lies are destined to crack, and the first tremor came with the passing of my grandfather. My grandfather, Robert, was my mother's father, but he was nothing like her. He was a quiet, contemplative man, a retired history professor who saw the world in patterns and evidence. He was my anchor to a time before the fire, a keeper of memories that didn't smell of smoke. He passed away peacefully at 82, leaving behind a legacy of books, dusty artifacts, and a single, sealed envelope addressed to me. His lawyer handed it to me at the reading of the will. My mother watched me, her expression a careful mixture of sympathy and curiosity. "Probably just some old memories, darling," she said, patting my hand. Dad was always so sentimental. I clutched the envelope, feeling the weight of my grandfather's familiar handwriting. I had no idea that inside this thin paper shell was a truth so heavy it would shatter everything I knew about my life, my scars, and the woman I called my mother. Life with my mother was like living in a beautifully decorated room with no windows. On the surface, everything was perfect. Susan had impeccable taste. Our home was immaculate. Her social calendar was always full of respectable events, and her public persona was flawless. She was the picture of strength and compassion, a narrative she carefully cultivated for 20 years. And I was her centerpiece, the living, breathing testament to her devotion. She loved telling the story of the fire, always with a dramatic tremor in her voice. She'd recount how she'd clawed her way through the smoke to get to my room, how she'd carried me out, how her world had stopped until she knew I would be okay. People would listen, their eyes welling with tears, and look at her with awe. They'd look at me with pity, a look I had grown to despise. This story was the bedrock of our relationship. It was the reason she felt entitled to know every detail of my life. When I went to college, she insisted on an apartment just 10 minutes from campus and dropped by unannounced 3 times a week. When I started my career as a dietitian, she would call my office to make sure everything was okay, much to my embarrassment. Any boyfriend I had was subjected to an interrogation so intense it felt like a background check for a national security clearance. None of them ever lasted long under her scrutiny. "He's just not good enough for you, Julia," she'd say with a sad smile. "After all you've been through, you deserve the absolute best." Her control was disguised as care. Her manipulation was framed as protection. It was a gilded cage, comfortable and secure, but a cage nonetheless. Any attempt I made to establish boundaries was met with emotional blackmail. "I'm sorry for caring so much," she'd say, her voice laced with hurt. "I suppose I can't help it. When you see your only child surrounded by flames, it changes you." How could I argue with that? How could I tell the woman who supposedly saved my life that her love felt like a weight on my chest? So I didn't. I smiled, I accepted her intrusive phone calls, I endured her critiques of my life choices, and I played my part as the grateful, scarred daughter. Mark was the only one who saw through it. He'd known me since kindergarten, before the fire. He remembered the vibrant, carefree girl I used to be. "It's not normal, Jules," he told me one evening over coffee. "She's not protecting you, she's controlling you. Your entire life is an extension of her identity." I bristled at his words. "You don't understand, Mark. You weren't there." He sighed, his expression softening. "I know, but I'm here now, and I see a woman who is afraid to live her own life because she's afraid of disappointing her mother." He was right, of course. I was terrified of disappointing her. My guilt was a constant companion, whispering that I owed her my happiness, my compliance, my life. I owed her everything, because she had given me everything after the fire had taken it all away. This carefully constructed reality was my truth. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, but it was the only one I had. Opening my grandfather's letter was like pulling on a loose thread, and I was about to watch the entire tapestry of my life unravel. I waited until I was back in the solitude of my own apartment to open the letter. The thick, cream-colored paper felt heavy in my hands. My grandfather's script was as I remembered it, elegant, precise, and unwavering. My mother had already called twice since I'd left the lawyer's office. "Have you opened it yet? What did he say?" she'd asked, her voice a little too eager. I'd lied and told her I was waiting for a quiet moment. The truth was, I was scared. A part of me sensed that this was a door I couldn't close once opened. Taking a deep breath, I broke the wax seal and unfolded the pages. The letter began with love. He wrote about his pride in the woman I had become, strong, independent, and kind. He reminisced about my childhood, about the days before the fire when my laughter filled his house. Then the tone shifted. "My dearest Julia," he wrote, "there is a burden I have carried for 20 years, a truth I kept silent out of a misguided desire to protect you and what was left of our family. But history has taught me that secrets are a cancer. They fester and destroy from within. You are a woman now, and you deserve to know the full story of your life, not the edited version you have been told. You deserve the truth about the fire." My heart began to pound against my ribs. I read on, my eyes scanning the words faster and faster. "Your mother, my daughter, has always been a complicated person. She craves admiration more than anything else. When your father died, she lost her primary source of identity and stability. She was adrift. The insurance policy on the old house was substantial, far more than its market value. Your father had taken it out a month before his accident. After his death, Susan was under financial strain, a fact she hid from everyone. She saw the policy as her only way out. I stopped, shaking my head. No, it wasn't possible. My mother wouldn't. I forced myself to continue reading. "The fire was not an accident, Julia. It was deliberately set. I didn't know this for certain until a year later. A former fire marshal, a friend from my university days, confided in me. He had been pressured by the chief to close the case quickly. He told me the accelerant traces were clear. They were officially recorded as inconclusive. He suspected arson from the start, and he suspected your mother. But there was no proof, and she was a grieving widow with an injured child. No one wanted to look too closely. The room felt cold, airless. I couldn't breathe. My gaze drifted to the scars on my arm, the skin puckered and pale. They suddenly felt different, not like a mark of tragedy, but a brand of betrayal. I confronted her. The letter continued. In private, I told her what I knew, what I suspected. She didn't confess, not in words, but her eyes. Her eyes told me everything. She broke down, not with guilt, but with a twisted justification. She spoke of the debts, the fear, the desire to give you a fresh start. She never intended for you to be hurt. She thought you were spending the night at my house. That was the plan. But you'd had a small fever, and she'd cancelled at the last minute. You being in that house was her mistake, her miscalculation. A wave of nausea washed over me. The story she had told for 20 years, of her heroism, of her mad dash to save me, was a lie. She wasn't a hero, she was the villain. She hadn't saved me from the fire, she had thrown me into it. I should have gone to the police. My grandfather wrote, his handwriting shakier now, as if the memory pained his hand. But she was my daughter, and you. You had already been through so much. I feared that sending your only remaining parent to prison would destroy you completely. So I made a terrible choice. I kept her secret on one condition, that she would dedicate her life to you, using the money to give you everything you ever needed. I thought I was protecting you. I now see I only built your cage. Forgive me, Julia. The truth won't heal your scars, but I hope it sets you free. In my safe deposit box, you will find my notes from that time, including the name of the fire marshal. It may be too late for legal justice, but it is never too late for the truth. The letter fell from my trembling fingers. I stared at the wall, seeing nothing. 20 years, my entire life, my identity, my relationship with my mother, all of it was a lie. The fire that had scarred my body was nothing compared to the blaze of this betrayal, a fire that was now raging inside me, burning away every last remnant of the girl who believed in her mother's love. In its place, something cold and hard began to form. Justice. For 2 days I was paralyzed. I didn't answer my phone, which rang incessantly with calls from my mother. Julia, darling, I'm getting worried. Please call me back. Her voicemails chirped, each one a fresh stab of betrayal. The sound of her voice, once a comfort, now made my skin crawl. On the 3rd day, I called the only person I knew I could trust. I called Mark. He was at my apartment within 20 minutes, his face etched with concern. I didn't say a word. I just handed him the letter. He read it in silence, his expression shifting from confusion to shock, and finally to a quiet, simmering rage on my behalf. When he looked up, his eyes were full of a resolve that mirrored my own. "What do you need?" he asked. It was the simplest and most powerful question anyone could have asked. The safe deposit box. I said, my voice hoarse, and I need to find that fire marshal. The next day, with the key my grandfather had left me, we went to the bank. The box contained a small, leather-bound journal. Inside were my grandfather's notes, written in his meticulous script. He detailed his conversation with his friend, the former fire marshal, a man named David Miller. He had even noted Miller's last known address and phone number from 20 years ago. He had documented his confrontation with Susan, describing her defensive and manipulative responses with chilling accuracy. He had laid out a breadcrumb trail, a historian's careful archive of a secret crime. Finding David Miller was our first real challenge. The address was 2 decades old, and the phone number was disconnected. This was where Mark's skills as a journalist became invaluable. He spent hours referencing public records, old phone books, and social media. People don't just vanish, he said, his fingers flying across his keyboard. They just get harder to find. After a day of dead ends, he found him. David Miller was retired and living in a small town 3 hours north. I called him, my heart hammering. I introduced myself as Robert's granddaughter and mentioned the fire. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I remember your grandfather," he said finally, his voice heavy with age, "and I remember that fire. It never sat right with me." I asked if I could come and talk to him. He agreed. Mark drove. I spent the entire ride staring out the window, my grandfather's journal open on my lap. We met Miller at a small diner. He was an old man with kind eyes and a weary expression, as if he'd been carrying this weight for years. I told him about the letter. He just nodded slowly, as if he'd been expecting this day to come. "Your grandfather was a good man," Miller said, stirring his coffee. He was torn up about it. When he came to me, I told him what I could. The initial sweep showed clear signs of an accelerant, a common household paint thinner, used in 3 separate spots in the living room. It was textbook arson, but the samples sent to the lab came back degraded. The report was buried, he sighed. The fire chief was a political appointee. Your mother was a sympathetic figure, a grieving widow. It was easier for everyone to call it a tragic accident. Pushing it would have meant ending my career. He felt guilty, he admitted. He'd kept his original, unofficial notes. After he retired, he never threw them away. It's not an official report, he warned. It wouldn't hold up in court after all this time. The statute of limitations for arson is long past. I don't want a court, I said, my voice. I don't want a court, I said, my voice low and steady. I want the truth to come out. I want everyone to see her for who she is. Miller looked at me, really looked at me, at the faint scars peeking out from my sleeve. Her big charity thing is coming up, isn't it? He asked. The Haven House Gala. I see her picture in the local paper every year. Susan, the selfless community pillar. He shook his head. If you want to make the truth public, that's the place to do it. She builds her entire world on that stage. Driving back home, a plan began to form in my mind, cold and clear. For 20 years, my mother had used the story of the fire to build herself a throne of public adoration. She had dined out on my pain, turning my tragedy into her triumph. Well, the gala was in 2 weeks. It was time for everyone to hear the real story. Her stage was about to become mine. The Haven House Foundation was my mother's pride and joy. It was a local charity for families displaced by domestic crises, and she was the chairwoman of the board. It was a noble cause, one that lent her an air of unimpeachable virtue. The annual gala was the crown jewel of the city's social calendar, a night where the wealthy and influential gathered to applaud her tireless work. She had been planning this year's event for months, and as always, I was expected to be there, sitting at the head table, her scarred survivor daughter. The silent, living proof of her strength. This year, I wouldn't be silent. The 2 weeks leading up to the gala were the most surreal of my life. I went through the motions, answering my mother's calls with a calm, detached voice that I didn't recognize as my own. I let her tell me about the flower arrangements, the seating charts, the keynote speaker. She was blissfully unaware that her world was about to be set on fire, and this time there would be no insurance policy to save her. You have to wear the strapless dress I bought you, darling, she said over the phone a few days before the event. The emerald green one. It's so elegant. We need to show everyone how confident you are. Don't let the scars hold you back. The casual cruelty of her words, once something I would have internalized as a misguided attempt at empowerment, now just fueled my resolve. She didn't want me to be confident. She wanted to display my scars, her trophy. Behind the scenes, Mark and I were preparing. Mark had reached out to a trusted colleague at a major news outlet, a seasoned investigative reporter named Sarah. He briefed her on the story, providing copies of my grandfather's letter and a summary of our conversation with David Miller. Sarah was cautious but intrigued. She agreed to attend the gala, recorder in hand, on the condition that the story was solid. She wanted to hear the confrontation herself. I also did my own digging. I found the original insurance claim for the fire. The payout was just over $1 million, a staggering sum 20 years ago. I then found records of my father's finances before his death. He was heavily in debt. My grandfather was right. My mother had been in a desperate financial situation. It was all there, a neat and tidy motive. My role was simple, yet terrifying. The gala always concluded with a speech from my mother, followed by a toast. For the past 5 years, she had started a new tradition, inviting me on stage to say a few words about what the foundation and my mother's support meant to me. It was meant to be the emotional climax of the evening, the part that guaranteed a flood of new donations. This year, I would give them a climax they would never forget. The night of the gala, I felt a strange sense of calm. I put on the emerald dress, but instead of feeling exposed, I felt powerful. The scars on my arm and shoulder were not marks of shame. They were my evidence. I looked at myself in the mirror. The frightened little girl was gone. In her place was a woman about to reclaim her own story. Mark was waiting for me in the hotel lobby. He was dressed in a sharp suit, posing as my guest. He gave me a reassuring nod. "Sarah is here," he murmured. "She's at the press table." David Miller also decided to come. He's sitting with his son at table 12. He said he wanted to see this through. My mother greeted me at the entrance, pulling me into a perfumed hug. "Julia, you look breathtaking," she gushed, her eyes scanning the room for photographers. "Everyone is so thrilled to see you." She led me to the head table, a queen showing off her prize. I smiled, a tight, controlled expression that she mistook for dutiful affection. The room was filled with applause as we took our seats. The stage was set, the audience was waiting, and the truth was tucked away in my clutch, ready for its grand debut. The evening was a masterclass in my mother's artifice. Speaker after speaker took the stage to praise her dedication, her selflessness, her unwavering commitment to the community. She would dab at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, accepting their accolades with practiced humility. I sat beside her, clapping at all the right moments, my face a perfect mask of serene composure. Inside, a storm was raging. I felt David Miller's presence in the room, a silent ally. I saw Sarah at the press table, her pen poised. Mark caught my eye from his seat and gave me a subtle, encouraging nod. They were my anchors in a sea of deception. Finally, the moment came. The MC announced my mother for her closing speech. She walked to the podium to a standing ovation. She spoke eloquently about hope, resilience, and the power of community. She talked about overcoming tragedy, her voice thick with emotion as she glanced towards me. We all face our own fires in life, she said, her voice resonating through the grand ballroom. Moments that test us, that scar us, but these moments do not have to define us. With love and support, we can emerge from the ashes stronger than before. Her eyes locked on mine. No one knows this better than my own daughter, Julia. Her journey has been my inspiration. Julia, my love, would you come up and say a few words? Another round of applause erupted. I stood up, my legs steady, and walked to the stage. I took the microphone from her, our hands brushing. Her skin was cold. I looked out at the sea of expectant faces, the city's elite, all hanging on my mother's carefully crafted narrative. I took a deep breath. "Thank you, Mom," I began, my voice clear and strong, amplified throughout the silent room, "and thank you all for being here to support such a wonderful cause. My mother just spoke about fires, and she's right. I know more about fires than most." I paused, letting the silence hang in the air. I turned to look directly at my mother, whose smile was beginning to flicker. "For 20 years, you have all heard the story of the fire that nearly killed me. You've heard how my mother, Susan, heroically saved me from the flames. It's a powerful story. It's the story this foundation and my mother's reputation was built on." I saw confusion rippling through the crowd. My mother's face had gone pale. She took a step towards me, a warning in her eyes. I turned back to the audience, but tonight, I want to tell you the true story, the story that has been a secret for 2 decades. The fire was not an accident. A collective gasp went through the room. It was arson, and the person who set it wasn't a stranger. It was the person who knew I was supposed to be out of the house that night, the person who stood to gain over $1 million from an insurance policy my father had just taken out. I let the words land. My mother was frozen, her mouth slightly agape, a look of pure horror dawning on her face. "She didn't save me from the fire," I said, my voice ringing with the conviction I didn't know I possessed. "She started it. My presence in that bedroom was a mistake, a miscalculation in an otherwise perfect plan." I held up a piece of paper, a copy of my grandfather's letter. "This is a letter from my grandfather, Robert, a man who kept this secret to protect me. In it, he details how he confronted my mother and how she all but confessed. He wrote, 'I thought I was protecting you. I now see I only built your cage.' Panic flashed in my mother's eyes. "This is absurd." She stammered into the microphone. "My daughter is. She's unwell, the trauma. It can distort memories. Is my memory distorted?" I countered, my voice rising. "Or was it the fire marshal's, the one who was pressured to label his arson report as inconclusive? His name is David Miller, and he is in this room tonight. Please stand up, Mr. Miller." Across the ballroom, David Miller slowly rose from his seat. A spotlight operator, confused but following the drama, swung a beam of light onto him. A murmur swept through the crowd like a shockwave. My mother looked as if she had been struck by lightning. Her perfect facade was shattering in real time, in front of the very people whose admiration she craved like oxygen. I have my grandfather's notes, I have the insurance records, and I have my scars. I said, finally pulling down the strap of my emerald dress to fully reveal the scarred skin on my shoulder. This is not a symbol of my survival. This is the evidence of her greed. The woman you all admire as a pillar of the community is a fraud. She built her perfect life on my pain and on a lie. I turned to her. All the color had drained from her face. She looked old, small, and utterly defeated. The applause she lived for had been replaced by a deafening silence, punctuated by whispers and the frantic clicking of Sarah's camera. I placed the microphone back on the podium. "The toast is cancelled," I said softly and walked off the stage. The unraveling was complete. I didn't stay to watch the full implosion. Mark met me by the exit, and we walked out of the hotel and into the cool night air, leaving the chaos behind. My entire body was trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer release of a 20-year-old burden. For the first time since I was 9 years old, I felt like I could breathe. The story broke the next morning. Sarah's article was the headline of the city's biggest news outlet, complete with quotes from a visibly shaken David Miller, excerpts from my grandfather's letter, and a timeline of the financial evidence. My mother's photograph was everywhere, her gala smile now looking grotesque in the context of the accusations. The Haven House Foundation immediately moved to distance itself, and within a week, Susan was forced to resign in disgrace. Her empire of lies crumbled to dust. The friends who had flocked to her side for years suddenly didn't answer her calls. The community that had once adored her now whispered her name with contempt. She was socially and publicly ruined, stripped of the admiration she had orchestrated her entire life to acquire. It was a punishment far more fitting than a prison sentence she would never have served. She had been sentenced to a life of irrelevance, forced to live with the truth everyone now knew. She tried to call me once, a week after the gala. I didn't answer. I blocked her number and never heard from her again. The months that followed were a period of quiet rebuilding. It was like learning to walk again. I had to deconstruct every memory, every interaction I ever had with my mother, and see it for what it was. A manipulation, a piece of the gilded cage. It was painful, but it was also liberating. I was no longer the grateful daughter. I was no longer a victim. I was just Julia. Mark was my constant support. Our friendship, forged in childhood and tested by this impossible truth, deepened into something more. He saw me, not my scars, and for the first time, I allowed myself to be seen. I started wearing short, sleeved shirts, first around the apartment, then out in public. The stares that I had always dreaded no longer held any power over me. My scars were not a story my mother could tell anymore. They were my story. They were a map of my past and a testament to the fact that I had survived not just a fire, but a lie. I eventually sold the apartment and moved to a small house with a garden on the edge of the city. I needed open space and fresh air. I continued my work as a dietitian, finding a renewed sense of purpose in helping others heal. My grandfather's letter had said he hoped the truth would set me free. He was right. It didn't erase the past, but it unlocked the future. The fire had defined my life for 2 decades, but it was just a single chapter. The rest of the book was mine to write. Standing in my garden, feeling the sun on my face and my scars, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the dawn had finally come.